All right, folks. We all know that one of the most common mishaps in hunting is damage to your rifle scope. Last year, I found the solution to that problem with the Stealthy Hunter rifle cover. It wraps around your scope and actions securely to protect it from getting knocked off of zero or even severely damaged. Stealthy Hunter also has a glassing pad and a wide variety of supplements for the outdoorsman, such as protein powder, CBD products, turmeric, and gut health supplements. They also make a lightweight trauma kit weighing in at just 14 ounces that includes everything you need and nothing you don't for all of your backcountry medical emergencies. To shop all of their equipment and supplements, go to StealthyHunter.com and enter the discount code at checkout, The Northern Hunter, to save on your order today. All Stealthy Hunter equipment is proudly made in the USA.
You're listening to the Northern Hunter Podcast, home of all things hunting, fishing, and outdoors in Alaska. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. My name is James Payne.
And I'm Mariah Humphreys.
And we are sitting here again with Chris Perez. Thank you for joining us for this week's batch of episodes.
How you guys doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. So guys, today, as promised, we are going to be covering predator hunting introductions. So getting into it for anybody that's looking to get out there and put down some fur this winter. Maybe you've been thinking about getting into it for the last couple of years, or it's your first winter up here and you're just looking for something to keep busy. We're going to be going over all the basics that you'll need to know before heading out into the field, equipment you'll want to use, things you'll want to look for, best times to get out there, and all of the nitty gritty. So we're going to be covering all that here soon. But as you always, this is an educational platform. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us. We've got our social medias on Instagram or Facebook. If you search at The Northern Hunter, you'll find us there. And if you'd like to support what we're doing here, the easiest way is always to like and share the show on whatever platform you're listening to it on. Subscribe to it, leave us a review. 5 stars are best. And a written review really helps out. If you'd like to help us grow and make more content, then if you head over to thenorthernhunter.com, we've got a great shop page there with some merch. You can get some logo wear. And we have a wonderful, beautiful partners page that Mo built for us. It's got all the different companies that have believed in what we're doing here. They've given discount codes for the gear. They make awesome stuff. And if you feel so inclined as to purchase gear from them, use that discount code. It's all listed either in the show notes or on the webpage there. And that gets you a nice discount. Also helps us out here at the Northern Hunter. So we appreciate everybody that goes and does that. So Chris, you've been predator hunting for a while. I think you came on, what was that, March? You came on and talked to us. It was the tail end of last predator season. And for anybody, I think that was episode 21 was the last time you joined us. We're into the 50s now. And you gave a pretty good overview of like predator hunting and stuff like that. For anybody that wants to go back and listen to that one, it's a great episode. But this we're hitting at the beginning, or actually a little bit before the beginning. I think Coyote might be opening. I don't know when this one's going to drop as far as the actual date goes, but Coyote will be opening pretty soon, and then the rest of them should open into November. But to kick this one off, for anybody that maybe doesn't know what predator hunting is here in Alaska, why don't you give us a basic overview kind of what is predator hunting in Alaska specific? Like, what are you doing? What are you trying? Like, what are the animals that are available to hunt? And just kind of like a general breakdown of what predator hunting is.
So you got lynx, coyotes,
yep,
2 fox species.
Okay. Is it only 2 up here?
I believe so.
Okay,
Arctic,
yeah.
I should really know this, but Arctic and reds.
Okay, yeah.
And then there's different color phases.
Within the reds.
Reds and also like seasonal phases for like the Arctic fox, right? They're darker in the summer, and then they go into their coats. And
like rabbits.
Yeah, and everything kind of seems to have like exactly. Ptarmigan, all these things.
Yeah.
But, so Wolverines, wolves.
Yep.
You got your small critters, predators.
Yeah. So basically anything that predates on like rabbits and birds.
Yeah, if
and,
you're if you're like in the southern part of the state where you're like closer to like an otter population, you can call those in.
Oh, no kidding.
Calls. Yeah, a lot. Like
Nice.
guys do that too. I don't know how common that is. Obviously, I have a limited experience in that, but there's a lot of opportunities for predator calling in the state. So,
and so by calling, you're talking about utilizing some form of either a mouth call or an electronic call, correct? To basically mimic a wounded animal, what these predators would consider an easy meal, right? Yep. That's okay. Yeah.
And so like species specific scenarios, right? And they're all gonna. I mean, it's they're all receptive to a different tune, right?
Okay.
And there's hand calls, e-callers, like you were saying, and you're just basically painting a picture to get them into range, right? And emulating meal sounds or scenarios, right?
Yeah. And this is primarily a wintertime ordeal up here in Alaska. I think the coyote season, I believe, opens middle of October. Is that right?
Yeah, and then you do have there's some opportunities under a hunting license depending on what unit you're hunting in.
Yep.
And that maybe that's something you guys want to get into down the road.
We got that
kind of complex, but
and then what is it? November 1st, I think, is when a lot of
November 1st is the general opener for everything in the state.
Gotcha.
And that is later in some units, right? That can go like December 1st, I believe. And I'm not really sure of all the different regs regarding other units. I'm kind of more familiar with our local,
right,
our local regs, right?
Yep. So essentially, like we've covered trapping a bit on the show, and trapping is you're basically trying to lure animals to either step where you want them to step or put their heads through a noose or something like that based on scent or some kind of an attractant that they're looking at. You're just doing the same thing essentially with sound, bringing them into range of a rifle. Right. And it's you've got trapping and then you've got predator hunting. That's the two ways people go after fur bears here in Alaska. Yep. Now, where most people would probably be familiar with this would be looking at, say, videos from the Midwest, or maybe not just the Midwest. I mean, they've got it in Arizona, they've got it in all kinds of places.
Bobcats, coyotes, lower 48 predator calling.
And there's some really awesome videos on YouTube about that stuff. I mean, some of these guys, they're so good at filming it. I mean, they lock onto those animals and they're coming in on a string, basically, just coming into that call. And the funny thing is, in some of those areas, those like agricultural areas where these coyotes are considered pests and they're just everywhere. I mean, like where I grew up in Kansas, there's tons of them everywhere. You're just driving to work in the morning and you see them out in the field somewhere.
They're very comfortable.
They're very comfortable, and they're very kind of. They know they're not in that much danger.
They're alpha.
Yeah. And so these guys, I mean, it's like, and I'm sure they cut out. The editing guy, I'm sure does a lot of cutting in between.
I'm sure
sets and stuff like that. He's probably got a full-time job there. But it's funny because they can use like these huge light bars and just light up this field, and the coyotes just sometimes don't tend to care.
There's some crazy regs too down south. Like I know there's like 3 different states that you can shoot from vehicles when you're predator running. I like Texas is one of them.
Yep.
They use white light,
use night vision, infrared, and all that jazz,
which is not a legal means of harvesting here,
unfortunately. I really wish. I understand why that's a rule, because they're not pests here. We don't have the numbers of coyotes that they do in like Kansas and Nebraska and whatnot. But like, man, it looks like so much fun.
Yeah. Well, we could always use some Alaska air miles and go.
There we go.
Go get it out of the system.
Have to do that at some point.
I'm game.
Let's do it. But kind of along that line. So you'd mentioned there's a lot of different species up here to hunt.
There is.
You've got cats and different kinds of dogs, and and in a lot of these videos that we're talking about now, the lower 48 videos, they're usually in areas where like coyotes are the primary predator, right? Coyote, they're
bobcats,
things like that. They're going after the fawns from the deer. They're going after people's chickens in their farms. They're going after all this different stuff. And I mean, they can do a lot more damage than just that.
Oh, yeah.
But, they're not as, they don't seem as skittish. I'll just say that. They don't seem to care that much. They can be very skittish. I mean, you watch some of those videos, and they really prove that it does take some coaxing to get them in sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in areas they get called a lot. They get pretty smart. But talk about the difference in your experience from like that style down there where they're very prevalent and they're very, as you put, alpha, in their range, to up here, and kind of why, like what's the behavioral differences that you've noticed?
I think down there there's less competition and there's fewer species.
Yeah.
So they're much more comfortable. Like a coyote's going to be kind of the top dog in the lower 48, right?
Right.
You got the occasional elusive mountain lion, right? You got cougars and you got bobcats, but coyotes are pretty sly.
Yeah.
They kind of rule the roost, right? So here, not so much. Like we've talked about before how they're really vocal down south. You hear them the same time every day. They're creatures of habit, right? And here, they don't seem to be so much so, right?
Yeah.
Because they kind of have to put a constant spin on their activity to avoid a coyote's not going to sit out there and just belt out howls and then and so that every wolf in the region knows he's there, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you have competition, and there's a concern for survivability too, right? Because you're just not the top predator.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that amazed me when I first moved up here was I would see coyotes running around every once in a while, but nowhere near as much as other places I've lived. And they're not vocal at all. Like, and they can be. I mean, they do make noise. I'm not going to say they don't.
It depends
but
on where you're at in the state. There is places where they're pretty vocal, but it's definitely not to the extent that you like where you and I are from down south and we're used to that. Like back home, I mean, you see them every day. They're almost like house pets, right?
Yeah.
It's like the neighbor's dog.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the idea really of shooting them there's not even that exciting, but here, I mean, it's a little different because they're a little more elusive. They're a little more valuable.
Right.
It's a prize, right?
Yeah. And so what's what would you, if you had to guesstimate like the success rate, like predator hunting up here, like if you were to go set 10 stands, right? Like go dedicate like a 4-day weekend. You really probably don't need a 4-day weekend to do 10 stands, but let's just however much time you need to go to run 10 stands. What would you say is the percentage that you'll actually like connect?
I think that's
all in Alaska.
It's kind of hard to put a number on that, but I think that's all dependent upon where we're at in the cycles, right? So, like when you're starting to have a cycle fall off, and so say that you have a species that's at its peak number wise, right?
Yeah.
Your food is going to become more scarce,
right?
So in turn, predators are going to be much more receptive to predator calling, right? And this is where you see a lot of guys have very high success rates.
And just for clarification to the listeners, you're talking about the population cycles, correct? So
yes.
So as one, like let's say as the predator population drops due to starvation or weather conditions, whatever might cause their population to go down, the prey population comes up.
Yep.
And then so they get in their high cycle, and then
the food is prevalent, and it's everything is based off cycles like that.
Yeah. Yep.
And it varies. There's different time frames. People put different timestamps at some parts. Some parts of the state, people will say that's 6 years, 8 years. I've heard a lot of different opinions on what those cycles look like.
Right.
If you've had like a dump in population, it's going to be much harder to call critters in, right?
Right.
But if it always seems like the last 2 years before you have those numbers fall off have always seemed to be the most successful.
Yeah.
They're the most receptive, like we're talking about. Prey is scarce.
Right. They're hungry.
I mean, and you can put up some good numbers. And And even in that, even with like ideal conditions like that, right?
Yeah.
You're still, it can be very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be very unproductive and you could really be let down, and but
the love of the game plays a big role. Like being able to stay dedicated to it.
And that's where like you run a trap line or something and stuff's marinating around the clock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're in bed, those traps are working,
right?
And and you're kind of habituating those animals to you doing your thing, and you're catching them off guard, whereas you can only put so many stands in a day,
right?
And you got work and you got things to do. So it's tough. It can be tough, but it's really fun too.
Yeah.
And it's rewarding when it all comes together.
Yeah. And so those cycles you were talking about, that's probably something that's not going to be, I guess this is not a word, but I'm going to use it as a word, researchable. Like there's probably not like outside of like real world experience, getting out there and talking to people who've been out there and doing stuff. I mean, so for somebody who's trying to do just that, like to get out there, I guess you had mentioned different times of year, different times of the season, I guess.
Right.
Dive into that as far as like what's the best time to be heading out there? I know the season opens on November 1st. In most places. That's not, again, everybody read your regulation books. Make sure you know that for a fact in your unit, in your area.
Yeah, and
for
it
the
does
animal
vary.
you're pursuing, because that's a big thing with the state of Alaska is like some areas lynx will open on one day, but fox might not open for a little bit later. And then
as with closures,
some things will close a lot sooner than other things. So make sure you're not just going to shoot whatever runs into your stand at all times.
Yeah. And so like there's certain, so even under a hunting license, right? You can harvest coyotes. Like me personally, I don't want to harvest a coyote in July while I'm out on a fishing trip that I could harvest when he's prime in the middle of January. Right. So, and I see kind of people get pretty gung-ho. They're like, oh, I can hunt coyotes all year round. And the other thing, you hear a lot of guys like down lower 48, they're like, well, coyotes aren't worth anything. Well, they're not these coyotes. And these coyotes are pretty high quality coyotes. I mean,
well, they got to have a lot better hides up here.
Yeah. I mean, and we just get better fur here.
Right.
And so a lot of guys have this idea that, well, the general market's low and they're not worth anything, but they are. And then the other thing too is it doesn't really matter what the worth is. They're just quality overall. And a lot of time you keep them for wall hangers or you gift them, and it's you just want to get good fur. Yeah. If you're gonna harvest an animal, get it in its prime, right?
Right.
So when you look at the fur auction numbers for a given year, and it's been a few years since I've looked at them, but there's always like this price range, like the low range pelts sold for this, the mid range sold for this, and the high range sold for this.
Right.
That high range coming from interior Alaska for the most part. Yes. And I'm sure there's some Canada.
Or north of.
Right. Those are the northern areas, right? There's a lot higher quality pelts up here.
Yeah.
That 1 year muskrat we're selling for like, that's not predator calling, but like they were selling for like $50 a pelt.
Yeah. Really?
Which was insane.
I remember when Martin were like $90 a piece.
We were selling them for like $10 a pelt. And thinking we were getting this sweet deal, and then we saw because like we've probably got some of the best muskrat that we're trapping around here that are going to be in that market.
Sure.
And they saw the high prices were up in the 50s, which is just insane for this little pelt that's not even a foot long. Unless some of those fat muskrats can be. Anyhow.
Well, and the fur market is probably the only thing that's more volatile than the stock market, honestly. Honestly, depending on style and fashion,
it can be.
Political stances and things like that. It's just
that year China was buying a ton of fur for their military or something like that. Yeah.
Well, it depends on military, and then there's like the like Canada goose, whether they're using real coyote or real wolf or real furs for their
there was like a real spike in price. Like I made out pretty well when that was a thing.
I remember that. It was a few years ago.
And it was unreal. I mean, coyotes were going for a pretty penny.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and yeah, even like prices, skyrocket and then bottom out, just depending on the political.
And you kind of
views
like
on it.
price of fuel. Also, I've noticed dictates that. Like,
Oh, really?
Yeah, the global price of fuel usually kind of dictates
That makes sense.
fur value, and
Mhm.
I don't know what really that pertains to. I don't know if that's like fuel is more expensive in certain countries and people resort to wearing fur more, right? Or whatever. I don't know if that, and that's just a theory, but I've noticed that.
Mhm.
With the cycles of fur, game prospers, so the predators prosper, and then once the predators are too high, the game dies off, and the predators die off because there's not enough food.
Mhm.
With that cycle, do you change your calling tactics or the kind of calls you use? When the cycle when you're at a good spot for calling versus when there's lots of game.
I think I think when you're really hitting it at like prime time when it's sort of towards the end of when that cycle is going to drop off.
Right.
I'm more things are pretty like steady pace, so I'm more running and gunning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? I don't consume the time and the energy on stand. I will move a lot.
Okay.
Now, when the numbers are lower, I'm going to consume a little more time on a spot, and then that's just my tactic. You're going to put a little more effort in, knowing that your numbers, your chances of success are lower.
Mhm.
I think when you got a lot of food running around, a lot of critters running around, if you don't get a response, you're a little more apt to pack up and go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And when things are scarce, if you haven't cut a set of tracks in a month, and all of a sudden you see a set of tracks, you might spend a little more time on that, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going to put your effort where it's worth it. So,
yep.
And that's just my perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And kind of just to wrap up on the fur thing, when you're, like you had said, a lot of times it doesn't matter what the market's doing. If you're predator hunting for the passion of predator hunting, a lot of people aren't predator hunting to sell to fur markets. That's not like the primary way of doing that.
No.
But like you said with wall hangers, it's a great way to, kind of keep that memory, keep that memorabilia. But the other cool thing is a lot of this fur, like you had just said, Mo, a lot of the stuff we have up here especially is high quality stuff.
It really is.
And there's people in any of these population bases, whether you're in Anchorage or Fairbanks or wherever there's a decent sized town, that work with that fur. And you can find people that can make you things if you don't want to just hang it up on the wall and let it, and look at it. But if you've got a, nice fur, you can trim a coat out with that. You can, make some gloves with that. You can do all kinds of stuff that's cool. I'm sure
it's pretty rewarding to see somebody, and everyone's not into it, right? Like we are.
Yeah.
It's really neat to see somebody's face light up when you hand them a tanned fur, and that's you're not going to go buy that at Walmart to hand to somebody for a birthday gift, right?
Exactly.
You put time into that. And it's a little more personal, I think. It's cool.
Absolutely.
It's just a cool thing.
Absolutely.
Well,
hey, let's take a break real quick, and then I want to dive into stands.
Right on.
All right, folks. We all know that one of the most common mishaps in hunting is damage to your rifle scope. Last year, I found the solution to that problem with the Stealthy Hunter rifle cover. It wraps around your scope and actions securely to protect it from getting knocked off of zero or even severely damaged. Stealthy Hunter also has a glassing pad and a wide variety of supplements for the outdoorsman, such as protein powder, CBD products, turmeric, and gut health supplements. They also make a lightweight trauma kit weighing in at just 14 ounces that includes everything you need and nothing you don't for all of your backcountry medical emergencies. To shop all of their equipment and supplements, go to StealthyHunter.com and enter the discount code at checkout, The Northern Hunter, to save on your order today. All Stealthy Hunter equipment is proudly made in the USA.
All right, so that was a lot about why to predator hunt and when to predator hunt. I want to dive in like nitty gritty style down to like the details of what it looks like to make a predator hunt. Right. So we've used that term a lot in this episode, and I think the last one with you as well. I don't think we dove super in depth into like what that looks like though. So you've mentioned some times that you would want to go out. Obviously, you're tracking the moon phases, tracking all these other features,
right?
The cycles and whatnot. But so if somebody's looking to go out and let's say go into like the differences too of like species specific stands too. So if there's any differences in the way you would set up, but like when you're going out, let's say you leave your house,
Right.
you're heading out.
Okay.
What are you looking for? What are you setting out to do, like step by step? Like what would that look like?
Well, you always have your idealistic thought of what something should look like, right?
Right. Yeah.
But
versus reality.
Versus reality.
Right.
But we have some pretty harsh terrain.
Mhm.
We got a lot of like geographical changes, pretty sudden.
Oh
in
yeah.
this state. And animals, I mean, they adapt to that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like say you think in terms of I'm going to go look for lynx in thick cover.
Yeah.
Well, like north of the Brooks Range, when things start flattening out, I mean, pilots see lynx all the time in open terrain, right?
Right.
And that's like totally against the grain. But animals they're gonna get outside of what they're comfortable in to find food.
Yeah.
And especially depending on like what the scarcity's like or availability's like.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know that there's a right or a wrong way to go.
Okay. Yeah.
Cats are always going to be you're going to want to target thicker stuff, kind of everyone always says target thicker.
Yeah.
Thicker
That's
cover.
like the general rule of thumb.
And you have a lot of guys say like, oh, well, lynx won't expose themselves in open areas. And we've had lynx come across 1,500 yard clearings on a string.
Yeah.
Wow.
All the way to 10 yards and get shot.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, and everything pesters them. Ravens will be pecking them on the way in. And I mean, yeah. And, I don't know if you guys are like, ravens seem to pester everything. They really do. They pester wolves and they'll fly just like, a couple feet above overhead and just bug every predator animal. And like
go kill something.
Go kill something for us. But they are very dependent on like predator success, right?
Right.
For their own survival. And so like that's one thing. I don't really think there's a right or wrong way to look at terrain for what you're doing.
Gotcha.
And the other thing too is you never really know what's going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
So like I would say for a new guy, I wouldn't really focus so much on, I think you can get really caught up in the idea of like the picture perfect stand, right?
Right. Yeah.
I would say more, I always reference this to like, just like trapping set and steel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you go out with a dozen traps, right? It's a long day to set a dozen traps.
Yeah.
And people don't get that. Like if you're really going to spread your gear out and you're going to
right.
optimize your use of those 12 traps.
Right.
It's going to take you all day to spread 12 traps. Unless you're like a really seasoned guy, you got a pattern.
Right.
Even then, a guy that's been at it for a long time is going to tell you, hey, when you're starting out, it's going to be pretty hard for you to spread 12 pieces of steel in a day. And you're going to be like, what? That's
right.
But setting up stands is that way too, because you have limited daylight.
Mm-hmm.
You're contending with all these things. You'd be amazed, and you guys know this because you guys have done a fair bit of calling.
Yeah.
But people would be amazed at how much time you consume getting out of the truck. If you got to get snowshoes on, which is most of the time you got to do that, gathering your gear, something's fogging up, your gloves are icing up, whatever.
Yeah.
That comes down to like carrying spare gear and stuff, minimizing time wasted, right?
Mm-hmm.
More time in the field.
Yeah.
And like your gear, your kit.
Yeah.
But I don't really know for a new guy that's getting into it that I would really focus a lot on where to go as much as just get out and go.
Yeah. Go find a spot and then optimize from there.
Well, and the other thing too is like every area is going to be different. You're going to have different population densities. You're going to have we've sat down on spots to call fox because we saw fox sign and called in packs of wolves with 22 mags in our laps, right? Like you just don't know what's where when.
Yeah.
And because of all this, like, the broad opportunity of species, right? I would say the bigger picture is just getting out.
Yeah.
And don't be so, you can really get hung up like, and there's great resources like different map apps on X, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I see guys do it with like big game stuff is that people consume more time planning than they do spending time in the field.
Absolutely.
And I would say it's for like a new guy, like don't over a new guy or new gal, don't overthink it. Just go get in the field.
Yeah.
And you're going to pick up on what's going on in your area. And that, like, you can never really you can never really dictate what's going to be where.
Right.
I mean, Alaska's so random like that. I mean, it's like you try to call coyotes, you call lynx in. You try to call lynx in, you call coyote in. You call fox in. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. Yep. I wouldn't focus so much on that starting out. If you really have like your heart set on, shooting a certain thing, like maybe kind of resort to like I was talking earlier about some of these books that I started out with, like Hunting the Predators. It's a book written by a guy that he kind of was one of the innovators of predator hunting in Alaska, and that's you can find it like on Amazon. The Alaska Alaska Trapper's Handbook is another good one too, because a lot of that stuff cross references to where animals are going to be hanging out and species. All that, like every section of that book is going to give you a layout on where to set up for what. Well, you can use that same information to set up a stand.
Right. Yeah.
And so those are really good resources for someone starting out. Or you can go like on, social media and get a million answers.
Yeah.
And,
but for somebody who's, let's say they're hung up on whether they should be focusing on like ponds or frozen creeks or valley bottoms or ridge tops. I mean, so you're saying like, don't focus too much on that. Focus on try each one and see what produces, see what happens.
Yeah,
like
see what happens. You're going to discover early on that it's very hard to even get a few stands in a day with the amount of daylight that you're afforded. And I would say if you have any like general hunting knowledge, use that, use some of these resources and just go at it. Of course, like thicker cover, if there's hairs and stuff like that, you're going to, in thicker cover, you might have high fox numbers, high lynx numbers. Open country, you might be looking at, wolves. They're sporadic too. Yeah. Sometimes they like to run in that thick boreal stuff. Other times they'll get on ridge tops and where they can see and they have a good vantage point. And, the advantage of altitude to see down and, caribou, moose, and they'll run those ridge tops. And then you got to be on those ridge tops and class in it. But there again, they run through the tight stuff. They're all over.
So once you get, let's just say this, and I'm going to pass on all these questions off to you because I mean people can hear us talk whenever they want, right? But you're only here for today. So once you get you figured out kind of where you want to go, right? Whether it's a pond or a creek or a valley bottom, whatever it is, like wherever you're going to head, you make a plan, you head out there. You had mentioned, getting your gear ready and stuff like that. Yeah. You obviously want to optimize your time, have your pack ready to roll, basically, so you can just get out of the truck, grab your pack, put your snowshoes on, grab your rifle, roll. But what's that next step of the setup look like? You're snowshoeing out.
So like one thing I kind of want to if I can backtrack.
Yes, absolutely.
So like another thing too that, and I hear a lot of people give this advice and it's the more time you spend. So you'll call an animal in, you'll shoot it. You'll be successful. Now, a lot of guys, they'll like celebrate. They get all pumped. They pick their kill up. They're out of there. Slow down. Walk out there and assess things. And a lot of times what you'll notice is we get these freeze thaw cycles. We get wind. like I've noticed that, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, wind is much more prevalent
It's
these
picking up a
days.
lot
It's
more
like,
these
it's
last
more
few
windy
years.
than it used to be, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, that gives you that like top crust.
Mm-hmm.
And I see all the time where you don't really have sign,
Yeah.
right? And everyone's like set up on sign. So, well, it like,
yeah, but
I mean,
if you've got a hard crust on top of that snow, though, I mean, a fox can walk across it and never leave a mark.
Well, yeah, and I mean, when I started kind of trying to school myself on some of this, I'd walk around and I'd look at stuff and I'm like, that thing didn't even leave any tracks, no sign. And you look at cats, they're built to float, right?
Right.
Cats, they hardly ever leave tracks unless you have like a fresh snow, right? And you're out there before that snow's been manipulated by the warming or thawing or freezing or wind. So I wouldn't rely so much on that.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, you're kind of on a wild goose chase. Are you spending time calling or are you spending time looking for sign?
Right. Yeah.
And
that's a good point.
I mean, I have a lot of times, a lot of places I call where there's no sign.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I mentioned like in episode 21, we kind of glanced over it real quick, but you see people like they'll ask questions, on these forums and stuff.
Right.
What do I set up on? Well, I won't. And you get these guys on there. They're like, I won't set up on areas that I don't see sign.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, maybe you don't see sign where you're at, but there could be a thoroughfare or a creek or a slough or something that's just out of sight.
Yeah,
that those animals are utilizing for travel, right? And they're going to break path. They're going to break course. If they're hungry or interested, they're going to break course to come to you.
Absolutely.
And maybe they don't frequent that area where you're sitting off the, couple 100 yards off the road or whatever. But they will come investigate.
Yeah. As they're passing by anyways. Yeah.
Yep. And the other thing too is, like I say, I've seen lynx come from 1,500 yards off. I mean, you're talking like almost a mile where they're a dot. You get all excited. You think it's a wolf or something, and it's a cat, right? And it's just like covering ground. I mean, massive. And if they're hungry, they're going to do what they need to do to eat.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they can get a scrap of whatever that is, and something else is mauling that prey animal, they're gonna come get their fills to keep moving.
Yep.
And and then if you're going to target coyotes and stuff like that, coyotes post hole a lot. They are not built for deep snow.
Right.
And so I've kind of mentioned in the past, like, I'll try to get a lot of my coyotes prime up pretty early. I feel like that's been my experience. Like mid-November, end of November, they're pretty furred up. Like, and the fur, the fur quality can fluctuate based on like where, where they're traveling. But I'll start hunting coyotes early because they can move.
Yeah.
They can cover a lot of ground, and coyotes will cover a lot of ground to get to you. And that's fun, right? And that can be productive. But then you start getting some of this really deep snow that we get, and they're very limited. So they'll stick to windblown peaks, low bottoms, river bottoms, icy areas, places where they'll run river bottoms and they'll just get right up out of the way on the tree line and bed down. And then they're kind of like wolves. They'll get back down there. They'll stay tight to those trees or they'll cross, but they're always they're where they can travel.
Right.
And
they're not going to make it harder on themselves.
Coyotes are very adaptable, but they do not travel well in the snow. And I mean, on that same note, I've watched coyotes come from a long way off, and it's almost like cool. You almost don't even want to shoot them. You're like, this thing's working so hard to get to me. And I mean, it's like, it's like a big guy walking through a bunch of deep snow with no snowshoes on. It's hilarious, But I think like starting out, I wouldn't focus so much on that. I would just go put time in and then if you're going to study maps or anything like that, or any of those kind of resources, like try to see what's beyond where you're calling.
Yeah.
And
what's around that tree
maybe
line.
not so much focus on what you see immediately, but like, okay, I know there's a slough back there, and there's the off chance that I'm going to sit here, I'm going to set a stand up, and there's going to be something moving or bedded down. Yeah. And I'm close enough, and it sounds enticing enough that thing's going to put the energy into getting to me.
Absolutely.
you know, and there's, like I always say, there's many schools of thought on this.
Oh yeah.
And you know,
Well,
I'm always learning. I'm always learning too. I mean, that's every time I think I have it figured out, I come home and I'm like, wow, I didn't know that was like that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
well, and that's, you can ask anybody I talk to, that's like the biggest reason I like hunting in general. I mean, for anything is because you never know it all.
Yeah.
You can tag out on bears every spring season.
Yep.
Every baiting season you tag out, and somebody's going to give you a piece of advice at some point that's just going to make it even better. You know, you've never peaked out, and anybody that thinks they've peaked out is just limiting themselves on that learning.
It's like you and I moose hunting. Learning stuff from you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's not my area of expertise. And that, like, man, every time, like, you know, I go out with a guy that knows more than me, I'm stoked.
Oh, absolutely. And that's all great points, because I think the location really is the big hang up for a lot of people. A lot of people, like you said, they just get hung up on where to go, and they think that this spot's not worth it. This isn't worth it. And I'm just, they'll drive somewhere, not see sign, and then they go home feeling defeated without even ever trying.
I think so, you know, when you take I did this to a buddy of mine. We put a couple days aside to go predator calling. He's new to predator calling.
Mm-hmm.
This is last year. And I kind of felt bad because I wanted to, I wanted him to pick where we were going to go.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, right away, he's just like, dude, like, where do we stop? Where do we stop? And so we got hung up on that, like, where do we stop thing.
Yep.
And I think it was kind of like a deterrent, right? And the thing is just pick a spot and go for it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you find a lot of places like that too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that will produce time and time again, because that's the other thing. You're in a spot where there is a path of travel, right? Or maybe a high food source in that area, or all the right things. And the only way to find those places is to go pound stands in. That's it. And
the second part to that is, if you were just going to drive right past it, a lot of other people probably will. You'll probably be in there all by yourself. So
well, and the other thing, and that's the thing, is go all the places that you aren't perfect, because those are, like you're saying, those are all the places other guys are.
Right.
And I see all these guys. They're like, oh, well, yeah, I got to sit here. Or I hear guys all the time. Oh, dude, we were out machining and I found this pond. Like, okay. Like, oh, well, they don't just hang out on ponds.
Right.
You know, and it's like, okay, that's great. And that gives you a good vantage point and a good field of view, but that's not all that, right?
You and I were talking about this. I don't remember if it was last week or a couple weeks ago now, but it was in reference to something else. But it's like, people get hung up on what they think the animal wants.
Yes.
Like, you're going where you think the animal should be, not actually where the animal is. Like, and that applies to everything from moose. Like, oh, if I was a moose, I'd be here.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean the real moose is going to be there. Or like, we talked about bear baiting earlier this week. You go in there and you spray. Oh, well, I like the way this smells. Do you know if the bears like the way it smells? Because you're not baiting yourself. Like, you know, like, and so, finding where the animals actually are, not where you think they're going to be or where you would want them to be because it's easy to get to or anything like that.
Yeah. And I would say, like, just chance it. I mean, because
what's the worst that happens?
Yeah, this is not like you're on like the hunt of a lifetime for like a big game animal, right? Like, it's okay if you mess up.
Yeah.
Right?
It's low stress.
Well, and then the other thing too is, like, the other half the time you'll be doing something that makes no sense, or you're slacking.
Yeah.
Or you're just your spirit's kind of beat out of you. You're like, man, this has really not been all it was chalked up to be. And all of a sudden something runs in on you. And then, and then half the time you forget what you were doing when that happened, right?
Yeah.
So that's what's so cool. Like, I don't know. I have buddies and stuff. So they're like, hey man, do whatever you want to do. It's cool. I mean, there's some things, sure, there's some like criteria, some base criteria we should all like follow. Cause I mean, you want to do some things that make sense, but so what? Like, trial and error.
All right. Well, let's get into that next part there. So you're leaving the truck, you go down to make your stand. What are some things to focus on that you have found to be very important during the setup of your stand? So you're snowshoeing in.
Yep.
What's your next step?
So are we like getting, like you're talking like equipment or like?
No, like well, kind of. So like setting up your call. If you're using an e-call or something like that.
So something I would say like
making noise, like
so. These animals are can be sound sensitive.
Yeah.
They also cannot be sound sensitive, right? Like, I mean, animals are very adaptive to,
the environment.
Yep. And they habituate to human behavior very easily.
Right.
I mean, and so like they're used to passing cars. They're used to snow machines.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go out to like, you go out to some of these popular places to ride snow machines, right? Where people really throttle on it on the weekends, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody's out there. You see all these trailers and pullouts. And you're riding in these big open spaces and you see all these critter tracks everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like,
yeah, it's because,
they're used to this stuff.
Yep.
And so, like one thing I see a lot of guys doing when they start out, they spend way too much time at the truck.
Yeah.
Way too much. And like, I park the truck, I'm gone.
Mm-hmm.
Like I got a buddy, Carl, my buddy Carl and I, we hunt a lot.
Yeah.
And him and I, we are in a rhythm where we spend zero time at the truck.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've gotten it down to where like, well, we hop out of the truck. He's got his snowshoes on his side. I got mine on my side. We slip everything over. And you can be as meticulous as you want to be about this or whatever. You might not think any of this stuff matters and you do it, put your spin on it. But what we like to do is like, we're going to hike in from the truck, have everything on the ready.
Yeah.
And so what we'll do is we'll have everything set up where we're going to make the least amount of noise.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the other thing. Don't drop your snowshoes like on a paved road. Slam all your gear down.
Yeah.
Walk over to the berm, set your stuff up on the soft snow. Get situated quietly and like take your time too. And then you see guys that smoke cigarette, they're rapping the whole time, walking in, talking. I mean, it's like any other thing you do, right? Like moose hunting. Mm-hmm. You watch guys, they just talk a bunch and they got the stereo going on the boat and they're like, we didn't see anything. It's like, well, really?
Well, no kidding.
Well, and then you got guys that talk in bear baits. Now I've done it.
Yeah.
And you got bears walking in because they could care less. You're sitting there ripping wrappers open. And I mean, I've been on the phone with my wife in a bait station and I had bears come running in, right? Like I got a bar say, I'm going to call my wife. I'm not really having a very fun night. Like, I want to complain to her. And next thing I'm like, I got to go. There's a bear underneath me, right? Like, I don't know. But so like situate things where it's the most efficient, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I like, you see people when they're starting out, they spend so much time at the truck. Like latch your doors, don't slam your doors.
Yeah,
right?
That's a big one. That's a very big one.
And bring in just try to be as efficient as possible in leaving the truck to start going into your stand.
Yeah.
Have all your gear packed up, have everything accessible. That would be my thing. Mm-hmm. Get snowshoes, and it's the same thing like everything else. Mm-hmm. Practice with your gear in the off season. Don't learn your gear in the field.
Yeah.
Like learn your gear in your yard.
Mm-hmm.
Like put your snowshoes on. You might get a set of snowshoes or like try some buddies and stuff. I see a lot of guys where they have these like binding contraptions. Mm-hmm. They're spending so much time getting in these things, so much time getting out of them. And it's burning your time. You're making it, you're wearing yourself out. You have all this stuff on to stay warm, right? Mm-hmm. These are big things. I feel like these are the bigger pieces to the puzzle.
Because you can do everything else right, but if you're slamming your doors and raking your snowshoes across asphalt and crunching around, talking, walking in, as you so put it, smelling like Marlboro Reds and Old Spice. Then you could do everything else right and you might not produce.
And some guys are like, some people are like, I'm just going after cats. Mm-hmm. And cats are a little less leery, right? You can get away with a lot with lynx. Right. They're pretty, you can and you can't, right? Mm-hmm. They're not so like scent sensitive.
Yeah.
And it's not that they can't smell. they just don't use that as like an early warning system like a canine does, right?
Yeah.
But they're very sound oriented. And so like, and I don't know, some guys, they think you can get away with a little more with cats or than you can with canines. When I'm really being serious and I really want to try to be successful, I'm always trying to like make sure I'm no scent. I'll try to descent stuff. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
Like,
my biggest thing I've always experienced with cats and heard everybody talk about is movement.
Yeah.
Is they're very keen on sight.
Yep.
Not so much smell like canines, but they will see you.
Yep.
And if you're out there, you know, let's say you get out there, you set your call up in front of you, and you kick back in the snowbank, you put your Stealthy Hunter glassing pad underneath you, so
stay warm.
Your hind end isn't getting all wet in the snow, and you are just sitting there playing around with stuff and moving stuff around and getting into your backpack, and you know you're constantly, let's say you're using binoculars and you're raising your binoculars to your face and putting them back down and raising them back up and putting them back down. That's gonna throw a cat out.
You know, and so many times before I've even gotten started, I'm doing all those things you're talking about, like right, and I look up and something's leaving.
You're right.
I'm not even calling yet. Like this looks like a hot spot, right? And then you're like, you look up. I mean, I've looked up before, and I'm doing all this stuff. Like, all right, I'm dipping into like a Reese's packet, and like I'm looking at my phone, and I'm like, and I look up, and this cat's walking off, like looking over his shoulder, right? Like, I mean, a lot of the time stuff's there, and this is like where you slam doors and you do all this stuff, and you know, they already have that alert.
Right. Yeah. At that point, you've lost the element of surprise.
I have a buddy that's a real stickler about this stuff. That's schooled me on a lot of, like, critiqued a lot of my bad habits. And he's helped me a lot. One of my mentors. And he's like, you get out and you slam the door, just get back in and leave. And I don't know that I'm that extreme about it. I mean, it can be really frustrating if you're like with somebody, they do that. But, and I've made some bad mistakes like that with noise and things like that, and still been successful. But why not? Your odds are already pretty limited, right? And your success rates are low.
Yeah.
So why not put all the odds in your favor?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And you don't know. Okay, so you're trying to call cats, and you smell like Marlboro Reds and Old Spice, right? And and a dog comes running in of like 3 potential varieties, right? Like a wolf, a coyote, a fox, and they smell you. I mean, that's a burned opportunity, right?
Right.
And maybe you're not that picky about your situation. You know what I mean? But me, I want to have all the odds in my favor.
Yeah.
Personally.
Well, the success rate in Alaska is already so much lower than you're going to experience somewhere else. You kind of have to stack everything in your favor that you can, that is in your control to stack.
Yeah.
So do you try to play the wind when you're setting up?
Yeah, I mean, you can, and then I'm sure like you guys notice this. You'll listen to these. These like bear baiting podcasts down south. You know, like set your tree stand up. According to prevailing wind. We don't really have like prevailing wind in a lot of areas in Alaska. I mean, I remember when I started trying to do that when I was setting like bear bait stands, like when I was learning, and I'm like, so where's the prevailing wind in here? Yeah. And you just have like swirling wind all night, and like it's blowing one way 1 minute, and 5 minutes later it's in your face, then it's to your back. It's like, okay, so we're like, of course you try to play the wind. And the other thing too is it's not like you're sitting there all day. So like if you can walk in, and I know guys that will, they are such sticklers about this stuff, and they're successful too. They will walk into a stand, and if the wind's not right, they won't even sit it and call it. Yeah. And I mean, that's a lot of people don't have that. I don't have that discipline sometimes. Right. But the thing is, you blow it out. Yeah. And so
now you can't come back later.
I mean, yeah. And like in episode 21, I talked about this too. Like if you're calling a valley, figure out which way the wind's going before because like people will they'll hit the first spot they land in the vehicle, right? They'll be like, okay, yeah, let's work our way down the next 20 miles. Okay, well, if you're working a river bottom and the wind's blowing where you're going to end up,
Yep.
why not go where you're going to end up and work your way back to where you started, right?
Yeah.
And that does matter.
Oh yeah.
Because
Yeah,
scent will carry 30 miles. I mean, it will. If you're in a river bottom, where's that scent stop?
Yeah.
I don't know. You know?
Right.
Yeah. Well, and so in one that just reminded me of a setup difference, and I'll ask your preference on this. I think we covered a little bit of this in that episode 21, but there's no problem with covering it again. Setting your call up, if you're using an electronic call, far away from you or right up next to you. And I think you had mentioned the biggest thing to pay attention to if you're putting it far away from you is that you're not blowing out the area, kind of as you just mentioned, by doing that. Yeah.
And so it's always nice, like I think with any type of hunting, if you're working the wind, to have some wind. And like still air can be bad too, right? Because it's not dispersing your scent molecules. It's not dissipating, right? But like there's times where if I have like where I just can't play the wind or I'm getting like a swirling wind, I won't put the call out very far.
Yeah.
Because
keep it close.
I'm already kind of losing, right?
Right, yeah.
And yeah, I mean you can play it from that perspective. But and the other thing too, if you're on a, like I talked about before, if you're on a big open spot, you don't want to go walk it, because that goes back to that whole thing. You're like digging in your gear, checking your phone, whatever, and something's walking away. You don't want to walk out and make a bunch of noise or disperse a bunch of scent. And you might, and here's the other thing too, like I've done this early on too, gone out to set my e-collar out, and I got my rifle over there on my bipod, and I look over to, my left or something, and there's a wolf leaving. Yeah. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I've done this several times. And so it's the whole thing, like when you're in moose camp, where you go pee, take your rifle.
Yep.
Well, yeah, when you go to set your call out, go take your rifle and think about this when you're setting up, because it's all about how meticulous you want to be. And like me, what I've learned is my time's valuable. Like I'm a dad. I got a family.
Right.
Like I got a full-time job. My time is very like limited. So I'm going to do everything I can. And that's that whole learning thing too. I'll talk to different people all the time, and hey, have you ever thought of this? I'm like, hey, I'm going to write this down and consider this the next time I go. Or and me personally, I'm going to put every odd in my favor. Right. Like,
so speaking of time, let's dive into that. So there's a pretty, I would say it's not, I guess universally understood was kind of a strong statement, but a fox stand is going to be shorter than a cat stand, right? If you are targeting cats, typically people say to give them 45 minutes or something to work their way in. They move a little slower. They don't just blow in like a dog will. If you're focusing on,
they can, but yeah, you're right. Like
right in a more typical sense.
I've had them come in like coyotes before.
Right. Like, not saying it can't happen, but yes,
you do want to anticipate longer soak
for like fox or coyote or something like that. Some people will say even as short as 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
What's your experience say to that? What do you do as far as like, because if you sit somewhere and let's say you don't see a coyote in 20 minutes, is it more worth your time to pick up and go to an area where there might be coyotes and put another 20 minutes in there? Or do you extend that out a little bit more? Like, what has your experience shown?
So I guess there's like a couple ways you can play that. So if you're limited on daylight or whatever, and you're trying to optimize your use of time during ambient light, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you're already kind of on the tail end of a stand and you're not going to make it to another one. And maybe you're going to pick like a okay spot, or you're like, man, I've never really had success the next place I'm going to go, but it's an option. Like,
right.
Maybe sit that spot a little longer. And the other thing is, what's your time worth?
Right.
What do you want to put into it?
Yeah.
I have buddies, they refuse to sit longer than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And they kill stuff, right?
Right.
I've called coyotes in. I sat a spot one time for an hour and 25 minutes and shot 2 coyotes.
Really?
Well, I mean,
yeah.
And I've never heard of that. That's a long time to just sit and marinate.
That is. Yeah.
And I mean, and I'm not going to lie. Like I got up and stretched a couple times. I was in some thick stuff, but like I had seen coyote sign, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna give it all I got. And the other thing, like night was falling.
Yeah.
And we were on a full moon, and that moon was coming up early, right? There wasn't a lot of transition period between daylight and moonlight,
right?
Just because of where that moon phase was. And so I sat it, and boom.
Yeah.
I've had cats come in like an hour and 10 minutes. Now, if I go home with a cat, am I going to be like regretful that I sat for an hour and 10 minutes?
No.
You know, I mean,
right. Yeah.
And I hear all these guys like, and there's times where I'm impatient, and I think that's the other thing too. You'll wail on a prey. You're like impatient, or you're just having a rough go, and you're like wailing on the predator call. You're not that enthusiastic about it. If you're like hand calling, and you're just like you're not into it. It's like anything, right? Like you're gonna put your all into it, or you're just gonna kind of like be half about it, right?
Yep.
But it's how much energy you want to put into it, and like what's it worth. And some guys, it's not worth it to go sit out there that long,
right?
And I don't really know. So I think like down south, I think a lot of people are of the mindset, you know, these guys will go into these coyote stands and stuff, and coyotes do show up pretty early if they're there.
Right.
I mean, you see these guys like they'll shoot a pair, and these things are coming back to back to back, and these guys are like walking around. Oh, I think I got one down over here. Oh, where'd the first one go? Where'd the second one go? Did you shoot this one? Oh, I think I shot that one. I mean, you just watch these guys just piling coyotes up on one stand, right? And it's like they've been there for like 15 minutes. Here, I like to put a little extra time in, and it's it can be difficult. It's
right.
I mean, it's I get cold fast. I'm one of those guys. Like, I mean, you know, when we're hunting and stuff, James, you've seen me. I'm always bundling up. I'm like, man, I'm cold. And I mean, like, I'm always the guy that's like getting cold before everyone else. But you know, that's the thing. You like patience pays off, and I think a lot of people kind of like have that generalized thought. They watch these videos and stuff, and it's just a different ball game altogether.
Right.
And here
videos can be so deceiving anyways. It's the time doesn't transfer in video the way it does in real life.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, here's an interesting question I'll put to you. So I think the biggest contributor that would make somebody give up early, aside from just it being late and getting dark and maybe it's cloudy and there's no moon, but in the wintertime up here, it is cold.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking, you know, neg 40s, neg 50s at times. Sometimes colder than that, depending on which part of the state you're in. What is like your cutoff? I mean, like, and I'll put this not your personal cutoff where like you can't stand it, but like, have you noticed there being a cutoff for the animals, like where they don't move around as much?
No. Like, so you always have, like, you talk to trappers and stuff, and you know, everyone has their theories about like moon phases. Well, things will slow down. I believe that. Like you see it with like fishing and stuff.
Yeah.
Like my wife and I, we've planned like charters and stuff. And then we're like, we didn't catch any fish. And it was like full moon phase, right? But it's like the middle of July. You're like, you don't even know that it's a full moon. Right? It doesn't get dark. Yeah. And we're like, go home and start putting all the pieces together. And we're like, man, that was like the worst fishing trip, right? I mean, we didn't get a bite. And then you're like, so I think some of that stuff corresponds. I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah.
It's a little late. It's okay. It's all right. But we were talking about temperature and animal movements and stuff.
So I think moon phases and all that stuff. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah,
I'm back on track here. So moon phases and weather and all that stuff. Sure, I think that all that plays a part in their activity. But here's the deal, right? You got to get up and eat.
Yeah,
you got to get up and move around. And like this idea that, oh man, it's been 50 below for like 5 days now. That's your deal.
They still get hungry.
That's your deal. These things are built for this stuff.
Yeah,
and in like I've talked to different guys, biologists and stuff that they're like, well, you know, they got to get up every 3 days minimum or whatever. Animals are they have to move.
Right.
Animals aren't going to go, oh, it's cold. Oh, it's a full moon. They have to.
Right.
Yeah. They don't stay inside and watch TV when it's that cold.
No, and I'm sure there's weather patterns that are more beneficial to calling, but I would not call because it's cold out or because it's stormy. I've had coyote. I've had just about everything run out of white walls of snow at me. Predator calling, and I remember when I started, like, hey, you guys want to go call? Oh man, it's supposed to snow all day. Those are like some of the best days I've ever had, or really chilly days. I will say that I have seen, and I don't know, it's just my personal experience. I've seen where you'll have a really, really a long cold spell, and that will break, and calling will be phenomenal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe those animals are a little happier about moving in.
I'm sure they are.
And I've seen windstorms pin animals down pretty good. Like you get some good winds. And it's hard to call in the wind too, because it throws it affects the broadcast of your sound and what you're trying to do, right? And it can whip scent, but I don't know. I wouldn't skip on a day of calling or anything because the weather doesn't seem right.
Gotcha.
If you can bear it. Now, like wind, that is a limiting factor.
Yeah.
Like
if it's blowing 40 miles an hour outside, then it's not even worth it.
And different people have different takes on this, but like 15 miles per hour is a lot of wind up there.
It is.
I mean, and if it's whipping all over the place, especially with canines and stuff, in my experience, it limits your chances.
Yeah.
It's just not the ideal circumstances, but
gotcha.
And I know guys that will go out and call howling wind act.
Really?
Yeah, and more power to them. We all got our limitations, right? But, there's some tough people out there.
There are.
And I got a buddy, he's like, 20 miles per hour is my cutoff. And I'm like, how's that even possible?
Yeah. That's a lot of wind.
It's a ton of wind.
Yeah.
But back to the same thing, and not that it really correlates to our atmosphere here, but like some of those guys back east, those guys get like crazy wind and they never have calm days. There's certain places in the lower 48 where that's all you're going to do. You're not going to call. If you're going to wait for the wind, you're never going to call.
Right.
I want to say that the average wind speed in Kansas is 22 miles an hour.
Yeah. And
that's average.
That is insane.
Yeah. But that's what the animals are used to. That's what the people are used to. It's the way it is. I know the average up here isn't 0 miles per hour, but it's got to be close.
Yeah.
Like it's like the interior of Alaska. Like obviously, if you get up into elevation and stuff like that, you're going to get a lot of wind.
Yeah,
If you're in valleys and stuff like that, you're going to get a lot of wind. But like, especially in the Fairbanks area, it's a very still
the Tanana Valley.
It's a very still place to be.
Yeah.
And so really, like you said, 15, 20 miles an hour, that's a huge change from nothing.
I think the way I've heard it described is what most people would consider like a stiff breeze is a lot of wind.
It is, yeah.
Here.
Well, just look at the trees. They're not built for wind at all.
No, we get a windstorm.
We get a 15 mile an hour windstorm and power's going out because trees are toppling over.
Nobody engineered for this.
Right. Yeah. All right. So,
and in kind of just like touch on that a little more is you can do things to so say it's a little colder. I have noticed where like I'll run and gun a little more.
Yeah.
Right. Or if it's windier, you're going to have a hard time broadcasting sound out like 300 yards.
Yeah.
So maybe move more, but don't move as far.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So if you can broadcast a lot of sound, you're not going to set up and call and then like be like, well, this spot's a bust. Well, let's go 600 yards over there. Well, you're still calling the same animals, right?
Right. Yeah.
But in a windstorm, that may not be so, right? Your ability to broadcast that sound might limit out at 300 yards.
Yeah.
So and it's going to be, it's going to be very hard for you to be like, let's move 300 yards to the right. Maybe move a quarter mile or just shy of, and kind of work incrementally like that. Right.
Yeah.
But like the quarter mile and I've picked stuff up like that. There's days where I'm just like, I'm not going to quit. Right. And and you connect.
Yep.
And then there's days you go home empty.
All right. Well, let's take a break real quick and then we'll dive into some gear. Hammer Bullets produces what we at the Northern Hunter consider to be the most premium and best working monolithic bullets on the market today. These bullets are easy to load, extremely accurate, and best of all, they're always in stock and ready to ship. The guys at Hammer designed them so that after penetrating the hide of an animal, it sheds its petals, initiating a massive energy dump while retaining the rear shank for maximum penetration. These bullets are built with 100% focus on how they perform on game, and their proprietary designs produce great BCs with specialized pressure grooves for amazing inherent accuracy and speed. They have a minimum expansion velocity of 1,800 feet per second, which allows for long-range shots, but with no maximum velocity, making them perfect for every cartridge from your granddaddy's old 30-30 to the high-velocity round like the Weatherby 3378 without having to worry about your bullet failing. To view their expansive selection and find the perfect match for your hunting needs, go to hammerbullets.com and use discount code TheNorthernHunter to drop the hammer on your next adventure. All right, so as we mentioned, this time of year that we're going to be predator hunting, it's very cold, but you still can't be just wearing whatever you want out there, right? You got your two most, well, aside from your weapon, I would say two of the most important things are what calls you're using and what clothes you're wearing. And are you blending in? Are you standing out? We'd mentioned with cats, they're very visual animals. They'll see you moving around. They might just see you sitting out there if you're sticking out like a sore thumb on the side of a hill or something like that. So go into what gear are you wearing when you're out there, both to stay warm and to keep yourself camouflaged and kind of blend in with the environment so that you're not just sticking out like a sore thumb.
Okay. So two of my favorite types of clothing is polar fleece.
Mm-hmm.
I love like just your basic like military issue polar fleece.
Yeah,
that's good stuff, and you can get that stuff like relatively cheap,
mm-hmm.
right? You can keep a few sets of it in a gear bag in your vehicle or on the snow machine or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I love waffle grid.
Yeah, me too.
I've tried all kinds of stuff, and I always go back to that same basic old issue waffle grid, right?
Yep.
And same thing. You sweat into that stuff a little bit. You're having like a long day of culling.
Mm-hmm.
Swap it out, and you warm back up. Get rid of that wet layer, whatever. And those are always kind of my base layers.
Mm-hmm.
When you and I were moose hunting, we were kind of talking a little bit about this, and I like another big thing is people really want to wear like very like well fitted gear.
Right.
I mean, like, so all my stuff is a size to 2 sizes larger because you want that insulative value.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And like Mo was talking on an episode that I was listening to a while back. He was saying, you put insulation into a wall. If you fluff it, it insulates. If you stuff it, it compacts, and you have no air in there, right? And it loses its insulative value. So when you start packing tight layers, and this is generalized for dressing here, and it for many different scenarios in the winter, right?
Yeah.
This
good
is
practice
not,
for everything.
I'm not like sharing like trade secrets here or anything. This is, I mean, it's just dressing wise.
Mm-hmm.
Swapping gear regularly, and everyone's going to have a different tolerance to the cold.
Right. Yeah.
So like me, I get cold easy. I might, you might not have to pack as much gear as I do in the truck.
Right.
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 I got a wardrobe in there and an action packer, right? Like, I mean, I'm for every scenario. So like a good change of socks. And that goes back to the same thing. If you're warm, you're going to have the ability to stay still. It's going to be more enjoyable,
and you're going to stay longer.
You're going to stay. And even if you're not a stay long guy, you're just going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And so, there's that, change of another thing too. Like if you're wearing like a beanie or something, carry a couple of them because you sweat into those too. And that's a lot of your heat, trapped in your cover, right?
Yep.
So if that's starting to get cold, that's the rest of your body temp's gonna drop pretty good.
Yeah.
If you're hot,
and those hats aren't very expensive. I mean, you can afford to get 2 of them. It depends on which one you get. But and then the other
ones. The other thing too is like maybe get like something that's like an earth tone or something that doesn't stand out when you're getting your waffle grid at like one of these surplus stores or something. Like That's generally where I'll find a lot of like my spare gear. And you don't have to have like high end, right? Like name brand stuff. And to be honest, a lot of that stuff really isn't suitable for what we're talking about doing.
Right.
Like, you know,
you don't want to be sitting out there in your Canada Goose jacket.
Well, I mean,
it would work really well. But
and you know what? If you can get like an overwhite or something for that, you like, that can. And there's lots of guys like I'll travel in my if I'm hunting cats, I'll travel in my snow camo, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm hunting canines, I've mentioned this before. I'll pop my stuff off at the truck, throw it into a tote. It doesn't go in my truck. It doesn't go in my house.
Right.
It doesn't. Right.
Doesn't absorb that human scent.
Nope. And I'm like pretty big on that too. I'll throw, and I kind of do that most of the time. I try to keep all that stuff separate. Like when my wife washes clothes, I always wash my camo separate. Right.
Yeah.
And I'll do like baking soda. I won't do detergent. No dryer sheets. Right. So, and that's just my method. But a lot of the places that you can get a lot of these base layers, you can find some like earth tone, like beanies, like, you know, again, military issue grade stuff that you can swap out throughout the day. And stay dry. And that's the same thing with your footwear, socks. Some people like the smart wool stuff. I actually, it sounds crazy, I run cotton socks now.
Do you really?
Yep, I'm all the way back to cotton socks again. And the reason being is it's the same thing. I feel like my feet kind of get smothered and I don't get that insulated value. So in order to have like my winter footwear like kind of tight enough to still function and I'm not swimming in it, I'll wear I'll wear a cotton sock, and that's totally against like that's kind of a no like in a survival situation. But also there again, if you have the comfort of a vehicle or machine like you, and you have that, you can store gear. I'll swap that stuff. I'll swap those out. T-shirts, if you have a T-shirt on,
absolutely.
You know, carry a change of everything. And then your rear end gets wet. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, it is.
Right. And even if you're not getting a lot of exposure, like you're sitting on your glassing pad or whatever, you're still going to get, maybe you sit on the opposite side that was, face down your last stand. And now you're soaking some of that water up in your pants. And it's so like little stuff like that. Gloves, change of gloves.
So with the socks thing, like for me personally, like switching from cotton to like the smart wool was like game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a cliche way of saying it, but it was amazing going from and like doing the 2-layer smart wool where you wear like the liner merino layer and base. And that eliminates a lot of scent. Something else I'm going to say with a lot of base layers, something I've discovered with some of the higher end base layers, there's a lot of stuff now where you've got merino that's got these like synthetic fibers and stuff they've to it. Like this hoodie I'm wearing right now, this First Light hoodie. It's absolutely amazing. I can wear it for a week working in it. Doesn't stink.
Yeah.
No smell.
Yep.
Wet, just wicks away from it.
Yeah, it's
right
got that
away.
moisture wicking.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I found like hunting and working in this stuff, I can go all day and go from sweating to not sweating, sweating to not sweating, and a little bit of time not sweating and stuff. It just wicks all the moisture away from my body. And it's definitely more money than going waffle grid at surplus.
I will say too, like Dalton and I, we were like, he got some new gear and he threw me like a hand me down like Sitka jacket. And I'll tell you what, like, and it's kind of one of those like puffy jackets. And I'm like, oh, this will be cool for bear baiting. But I find myself wearing it more and more, and it's really warm. And I think it's going to be it's going to be a piece of my equipment this calling season. It's like super comfy. I can't remember the make.
The ambient jacket.
Maybe.
But I mean, I've like really fallen in love with it. And I'm like, not like a big Sitka like name brand guy, but I'll tell you what, like, that thing is really cozy and it's super lightweight, but I can't believe how warm it is. So, I mean, whatever, I think it's going to be really like case by case, right?
Right.
Because we all get, like, notice you, James, we'll be out doing something and you're in a t-shirt and I'm like putting another layer on, right? And so, I mean, everyone's different, right? My cold tolerance has never been very high. The older I get too, it's starting to punch right through me, right? Like, but it's all dependent on, and that's another good thing. It goes back to that, use your gear in your yard.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Go hang out for a couple hours in the backyard.
if you're outside with the kids or you're
Yeah.
out like snowshoeing with the girlfriend or the wife, like go try your gear out. Like,
Yep.
and just look at how much time you're consuming with this stuff, because
Mhm.
if you're, that's a bit cutting down on your,
Yeah.
cutting down on your getting ready time. Right.
Right.
And,
Now, what about your outer layer as far as your camo goes? Are you running like just standard over whites, or do you have like a specific like pattern you think works better, or like go like different situations where maybe you're dealing with a little bit of underbrush and some clear open areas, or maybe you're in some thick. Like how do you adjust your outer like camo layer?
I just like, I think we talked about this again, episode 21. Like I'm always mixing gear.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there again, you have like a good inventory of stuff with you, right? Like different, you know, and everyone has a different take on how effective camo really is. I think if you're breaking up your outline, it's just common sense, like to me.
Yeah.
If say you're up on some south facing stuff, like late season, where we're starting to get those long days and the snow's starting to fall off, but it's still they're trying to get like coyotes and wolves, and the only place you have to stash out's a dark spot. You're not going to wear snow camo in, in like a patch of spruce trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
So carry stuff to kind of switch into, or mix gear. Like sometimes I'll wear, what are those big puffy, the Sitka, that beanie? I can't remember what it's called, but they're really nice.
Yeah.
But like sometimes I'll rock that thing, and then like maybe like a regular camo hoodie and throw that up around my head, and you just mix it up a little bit, and then wear my snow camo, my outer layer. Like I like a lot of like the King's camo stuff. Like
I've seen a lot of that stuff.
I really dig the King's camo.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of cool patterns in there. Again, I don't know if it matters. It feels good.
So,
and it's a confidence booster, right? But like some of their like winter like desert patterns and stuff really, really kind of like correspond to like a lot of our terrain and because we have like a lot of that, like
that's true.
We have like a lot of those like golden tones from stuff like, you know, the fall colors that kind of hang out on brush and stuff. So, and then you got your darker stuff, and there again, I think that's kind of personal preference.
Yeah,
and I don't know that you can really go wrong. Now, Carl and I were talking, and he, with his experience, he's got some background in like, you know, how animals see, and I pick his brain a lot. But he kind of brought up the fact that different types of like materials put off UV. Right. And I never even thought about that. But canines see UV. So you go put this wicked like snow camo pattern on, and your buddies are like, man, you look awesome, right? Yeah. And now you're just like putting a billboard on yourself. You're the only UV thing in a natural setting with not much UV going on, right? And so, Carl said he's like one of the best ways that you can check that out is like, you know, like some like black lights, or like he's like walk into something that has that like where it kind of makes that UV pop, and you'll know. And you know, I don't know if you can do that with your phone or whatever. Or something,
all I've ever used for whites is like that bed sheet throw over as like it's just like a great big lets you move, like. And I've never even put the bottoms on. It's usually just the top and like whatever earth tone snow pants I'm wearing. That's always because I've always thought, there's always bushes, there's always something. Yeah, and at the least, if there's not, I'll tuck my legs into the snow. Like,
right, yeah.
And you know, I've seen like some people use like ghillie suits and different stuff like that, but you know, a lot of that material's super light. So then you go back to the same thing. Like, cool, you're in this like super camo decked out suit, right? But now like you're the only thing fluttering. Right, because you have all this light material that it is light enough that a subtle breeze is picking it up, but it's not really moving like limbs or like right. So I think you can get this back to the same thing, like setup. I think you can get a little wrapped up in your camo.
Yeah.
And
don't overthink it too much.
I don't think I would go out there like wearing stuff with like crazy like geometric patterns and stuff on it, right? And like be like, oh, it just doesn't matter. Like
Black Cryptek.
Right.
Um,
And what about your? So that pretty well covers that, I'd say. What about your call? What should people be looking for like a beginner setup? Hand calls, e-callers. What are some good brands that you trust? Ones that you've used?
so I love all the Fox Pro stuff.
Yeah, that's what I used to.
You can get like sound cards that are kind of tailored specific to what you're targeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we talked about this before, but you can kind of buy these with like preset sounds.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And a lot of half that stuff you're not even going to use, right? Like you got like chickens in a chicken coop. It's like, okay, great. I mean,
Right.
that might work like around a residential area. I don't know. Like, and there again, like down south, a lot of the stuff is engineered with down south in mind.
Oh yeah.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're like, why would I have like these sounds? But if you're like on farmland or something, that is going to be beneficial.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
you
absolutely.
got a fox that's like a gray fox that's like robbing a chicken coop.
Yeah.
You're gonna run chicken sounds, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're not gonna. I mean, and that might work here too.
Mhm.
But you're not really gonna go out with that in mind, right?
Not
So
up here. Yeah.
it's kind of cool too. You can download your own sounds. You can pre-order your caller with those sounds input on it, like from Fox Pro. You can, I think
mine came with like 200 sounds on it or something crazy like that. Like, yeah.
And I mean, there's some good stuff on there.
Mhm.
And you can actually talk to someone at Fox Pro. They have like a great customer service base. They're amazing.
Yeah.
And when I bought mine, I usually will talk to somebody, and I've actually gone through like verbally and built a sound list, and they're like, oh, okay. And they send it out, and you can buy them locally.
Yeah.
You could run to any of the local places and buy, I think any low end Fox Pro has pretty good sound output and like a good list of sounds that you can get rolling with.
Right.
And then, does that kind of,
yeah. What's your recommendation on like hand calls? Is that worth it?
yeah. So like if you're going to get into like coyote calling and stuff, those coyote calls work for a lot of different situations too, right? Because coyotes aren't just receptive to prey sounds; they're territorial animals too, right? So there's a lot of it's like guys calling moose. You learn different like cow call tones and different how long to drag this on, or maybe this bull doesn't like a long cow call. He's into a short cow call, or one every 15 minutes. You do the same thing with hand calls with coyotes.
Yeah.
Learn to howl, learn what the howls mean. And that is where like some of those like more mainstream resources, like you can learn how to use a coyote call, and that's awesome. And that corresponds to our environment.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, and I know some of the sounds on my Fox Pro are like combative sounds. Like you have, I think a couple of the coyote ones on mine are actually like coyote intruder. Like that's the label of it. And it's like it's the sound like of a challenging coyote. Or even like a lost coyote, something like that, where they'll think, okay, something wandered in and it's trying to find out what's in this area. And so then they'll come investigate.
That's like another good thing to kind of, if depending on your interest, right? It's a good thing to kind of learn like when those breeding seasons start.
Yeah.
If that's something you want to target. Some people are like, I lived where there's a bunch of coyotes. I shot a bunch. I don't want to do that in Alaska, right? I'm stationed here. I want to kill lynx, or whatever, and maybe someone's like, I want to shoot a nice big like buffed out coyote with long, 5-inch guard hairs, and I've never seen one like that. Right?
Yeah,
right.
So, learn those breeding cycles, like, and that's pretty extensive. We could sit here for a long time on that. And you'll like with some of those howls, a lot of people they'll just wail on those howls. You can scare coyotes like out of the country, right? Like, I mean, some guys they'll start with like challenge howls. I like when I'm really targeting coyotes, it's like more submissive stuff or like pup stuff, because a big dominant coyote he's going to come into any of that stuff if he's interested. And it's like it's like the guy explained this one day. You're not going to roll into a bar and like pick the biggest guy to go get in a fight with, right? So you don't want to get out there wailing on dominant coyote, mature male coyote howls,
Right.
But at the same time, and this isn't really a secret at this point, really. Now there's a lot of guys that will call wolves with coyote howls.
Oh yeah.
And I remember when that was kind of like one of the best kept secrets, but that's a little, and there's a way to do that. So, but I've seen where guys have just like, they've worked the coyote howlers and wolves just, I mean, they get fired up.
Oh, I bet.
And that's another thing. Like we were talking earlier, that's, you don't hear coyotes as vocal here. So I think that's kind of a treat sometimes when wolves hear that. They're like, oh, cool. We don't hear that all the time. And we don't want that guy around here.
Right. Yeah.
And there's dominance there too. And then you can get wolf howlers. You and I were talking about that. You can get into all kinds of stuff.
So with the prey side of calling, have you ever physically witnessed a rabbit die? Like in the wild?
So what I've done is my early days of, I did some fox snaring.
Yep.
And I've caught snowshoe hares.
Yep.
And I always let them go. Because half the time they wouldn't choke themselves out, or they'd be like hip caught and they wouldn't be like injured. And they'll bite you and they'll claw you and scratch you. You think you're picking a nice docile bunny up to let it go, right? I mean, they'll tear you up.
They're wild animals.
And I mean, they're built to fight too. I mean, for what they are, like, but yeah, they'll wail.
Yeah. So I witnessed a ermine, like, little 8-inch ermine with a little 3-inch tail or whatever on it. It's like no bigger than 2 inches in diameter at the biggest point, right? I witnessed one of those, like, it's like, what, a fifth, maybe a tenth the size of this rabbit.
Yeah.
Like,
they're vicious though.
Attack and kill a rabbit. In a wheeler trail right next to where we were moose hunting. They came out of the bushes in the trail and for days we'd walk by that rabbit and watch the just less and less meat left. Like that ermine was just eating away at it. But I mean, it was insane. Like all of a sudden, just the screams, just like you hear on the call.
when you're, we had one. So my wife and I, we had one a few years ago that we'd be dressing grouse out on the side of our house. We had this little like wood table.
Okay.
And this ermine would just come running up every time we'd be dressing grouse and like literally come right up to us. She has some really cool photos of this thing. And it got pretty comfortable and it would get aggressive. It would like hiss and growl and stuff.
No kidding.
But you would literally like, when you're cleaning fish at like Chitna or something, you're throwing scraps in and the seagulls are splitting with your stuff. That's how this thing was.
Really?
Like you could just throw him like a wing and he'd bail and then he'd come back and it was the weirdest thing. Like anytime we'd be dressing anything out, we did a caribou one time and this thing just like, I look over and this thing just standing on this table, like looking at me, waiting for a handout. They're
cool.
wild ants. I mean,
guys.
they are they are tough.
Yeah.
But and that's something else is like jumping off topic here, but we were talking about how everything is a predator to another thing here, right? And there's so many and
layers of predators. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, James, we were out moose hunting and it was kind of shady on the side of the creek that we were on, so we moved over to eat breakfast on the sunny side and we had the sun at our back and that mallard blew in and that fox or that hawk was chasing him and slammed him and got him right in front of us. And you and I like, whoa, I'm like, James, look at that. That duck's, he's got a hawk on his butt, but like everything is hiding from something. Right. Like, and so, I don't know what I was getting at there. Oh yeah, even the little like then that guy's got to contend with birds trying to eat him, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
right. Like that mean little ermine, right? Like I mean, it's a.
No, I hate to be the bird that picks him up by accident. Because he's gonna start gnawing on him.
And to go back to your point, your original point there, I think most of those sounds, like when you get them from Foxborough and stuff like that, they're actual recorded.
They are.
They're legitimately recorded
somebody
sounds.
Had to grab a rabbit and twist his leg, but
yeah, Peter might have something to say about that.
Whatever. But I just remember hearing that and thinking like I could not believe how accurate. Like I heard that rabbit screaming and I'm like, that sounds just like cording.
Right. Yeah.
It's just like it.
Yeah.
Well, and something that's so since you're on the topic, we're on the topic of this, right? So I would set these snares, and when you're catching snowshoe hares and fox snares, you don't know what you're doing, right?
They're set too low.
It's way too low, right? Learning. So that's something else. Is like I always carried leather gloves, like welding gloves with me, and I'd go to release them, right? Well, I mean, they would wail, but it's not that loud. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's something else to think about with your calling is like
keeping a realistic volume.
When that one was dying, it was loud.
Yeah, and I mean, and rabbits will wail, but I mean, we're talking about some of these like e-collars. I mean, you'll hear people. How we've talked about in the past, hunting busy areas and close to town. I've sat out spots when I first started trying to go to places close to town. Learning, and I could hear guys predator calling.
Wow.
Right? And I mean, and there's a time to wail and there's a time to kind of
broadcast,
simulate realism, right? But like, anyway, you can get carried away with, I think sometimes with some of those sounds.
So kind of along that line, before we came back from the break, you had been you went on a really, really nice, I guess you could call it a tangent about
sounds about right.
Predator, your direction, your calling direction, your calling positioning and all of that. See if you can replicate that, because that was a really good, really informative. And I wish we'd had the mics going at that.
It was just kind of like a random thought. And I I have a lot of those. So something I used to do a lot when I started, is you have like a tendency to, you pick your spot, you're like, okay, I'm going to sit up there, and you'll point that e-collar away from you. And what I've noticed, and I've noticed this with almost every species, is animals will circle to get head on with that sound. Yeah. Or they'll come in at your 6. Right? So they'll come in with the plan of attack, or it's almost like they try to align with where that sound's coming from. And they're really good. That's another thing. They're very good at like pinpointing sound. Yeah. And that goes with any type of calling, like moose calling. People were like, I didn't call for 30 minutes. And all of a sudden this moose just walked out of these willows, right? Animals are very good at pinpointing sound. And so there's the obvious disadvantages to that, because so if you have a predator rolling in head on and you're adjusting for a shot, you are in his line of sight.
He's looking right at you. Yeah.
Right.
And also, and I've had this happen where I've had him pop out right next to me and bail. Or I've gotten up and there's tracks leading all the way up to my back, right? To my 6. And then you can see like where they planted for a minute, or they kind of like fumbled around and bailed and they probably saw me, right?
Right.
And so setting that call up in a way that they have to come in like from a side angle, just throwing that off. And you see a lot of people that are starting out do that. I don't know if it's just like human habit, but they align that sound with them. Yeah. And it's and I have had a lot of missed opportunities because of doing that. And so at some point you have to make a commitment to line up a shot, right? Well, they're going to track your movement. They're already looking for movement. They have the sound side of things, pinpointed, right? Well, now the next thing is movement. Yeah. Right. So it's like
they're looking for what's making that sound.
And you've just added that. And on that note, I've had this happen. So I've had where fox come in head on. I've had this happen with fox a lot. And it's almost kind of like it'll startle you a little bit, but you'll go to line up to shoot them and they'll catch your movement. And it's not that they see you, but they see that movement and they'll bomb at you. Like I've had fox run right at me before. Like you can kind of see them and they'll, and I've seen lynx do that too, because and that's the other thing. If you're kind of like, if your silhouette's broken up and you're concealed well, but you make a little movement and that animal picks up on that little, keys in on that little bit of movement, sometimes they'll get on step and start coming to you.
They might think you're the rabbit.
And I've had that happen several
Yeah.
times. The more you call, the more, I mean, I've know a lot of people that have experienced this.
Mhm.
And fox, for some reason, it seems to happen with fox a lot. I
Yeah.
don't know why. They just run it like you're like, is this thing running at me? Like, okay, it can't hurt me, right? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
yeah. But you see them like get on step, and that can also be against your, that can be a bad thing too.
Yeah.
Because then they just ID you and they're out of there.
Mhm.
They're like, well, there's a person sitting there.
So I know that's some of the argument for concealing your movement, so they don't see you set up for the shot and all that stuff, is to put your call farther away from you. Whether you're walking it out and sticking it in a bush somewhere in front of you, so that they're bombing towards that bush, not towards you, or maybe just out in the open somewhere. You just bury it down in the snow. What would be the different situations for you when you would do that versus keeping it up close and personal right next to you?
So like if you're in more open space, you can always, you can put it a little further.
Yeah.
If you're in tighter cover and your shot opportunities are less, like you have a lot of obstructions,
close
right?
distance. Yeah.
You can bring it in close. Another thing, kind of going back to the angling it away, like kind of just angling it off of your position, right? Is a lot of, they're observing constantly. They're investigating the situation as they're approaching, right? So another thing that's advantageous about setting that call up like that is their foot placement's very meticulous. Like you ever watch lynx? They're like black bears, right? They come in quiet. They'll kind of feel the ground, then they won't just set their foot. They'll kind of ease into setting that paw down. Well, and they're doing other stuff too. They're observing. They're looking over their shoulders. These are all times where you're getting into position.
Yeah.
So, and I see a lot of people do this. I've done this. Guys that like waterfowl hunt that transition over to, I've seen this with guys like friends of mine that waterfowl hunt. They will swing, and that's so much movement, right?
Yeah.
And what you really kind of want to do is every time that animal looks away, you advance a little more into the position that you're seeking, right? To line up for that shot. This goes back to having like a good bipod, having that rifle already where it's going to be,
right?
If you can swing it, so you have less steps to get into position to mount, to shoulder that rifle and take that shot. And you'll see guys excitement too. They'll swing and that animal's out of there. Because that movement, they have such a broad field of view.
Right.
It's insane. And they'll catch that out of the corner of their eye. And the thing is that a lot of the time they won't even double take. They're gone.
Yeah, right.
Because they don't need, they've already pinpointed where that sound's coming from. You're a threat. And they're not even going to think twice to look back at you again to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
And they're gone. And then sometimes they
Yeah.
And I've had cats too, where I'll move, they'll look at me and I'll stop moving and they'll carry on about their business.
Yeah.
Right? Because like maybe I was a bird flying by. Maybe my hand was a bird flying by and it's over now. I don't know how you know what I mean? I'm not a lynx, but but I think this way.
Yeah. So not to get too specific about it, but when you say, push the sound off at an angle away from you, are you talking like a 45-degree angle off to either side in front of you, or like directly?
Yeah, you can play with it
90 degrees away from you.
90 degrees is good.
Yeah.
And you can do that also with the wind, right? You can, because also that's the other thing too, depending on what you're sitting up against or how your cover's set up. And there's a lot of different resources for this too, to learn how to read wind and play wind. But you sometimes maybe aim that call with the wind.
Yeah.
Right. It's because sound also broadcasts with wind direction.
Right.
If you're calling into the wind, it can be muffled, right? And then also, those animals are also coming upwind, right?
Right.
Because they're investigating, they're cautious. So that's if you're pointing that call into that direction, and it doesn't always work out that way,
right?
But these are the base fundamentals sort of all hunting, right?
Yeah.
And you can get as technical as you want.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think any of those things, just never where they're going to come in at your 6 and never where they're going to come in at 12 o'clock, right?
Because if you've got it angled it at
and then so say that you throw that slightly off, and the other thing too, they're animals. You don't know what they're going to do.
Right.
And sometimes they'll come. I mean, you have cats walk out 5 feet next to you, and they cut right down in front of you and start wandering to that call. And I mean, you could shoot them at 5 feet if you could turn and not get caught, right?
Right.
We've had super close shots, like 5 yards. We've shot cats, We've had cats sit down between us when there's been 2 of us, and you're just kind of look at each other like, what are we going to do about this? Like, I don't want to shoot you on accident, right? Like, kind of like, nod to your buddy, like, go ahead, man. When he's clear of me, go ahead and kill him.
Right.
He gets past my boots, take him out, and they do different stuff. They're unpredictable, but there is some predictability, right, in their behavior.
Yeah.
When you kind of like learn this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Kind of on that, is there like a predictable, let's say you're targeting something, right? Let's say, I don't know how the seasons really line up towards the end of the year, but let's say lynx is closed, fox is open.
Okay.
Or vice versa, whichever way, right? Wherever you're hunting, one's open, the other's not. So you're targeting lynx or fox specifically.
Okay.
Is there sounds? Is there certain calls that you found work better for one or the other, as far as like what animals or what like situations, like the scenarios you're trying to put in place for each one of these, or do they kind of just react the same to the same kinds of sounds? And I got one more question, but I'll save that till after you answer this one.
So like, so everyone always kind of thinks like snowshoe hare.
Right.
Everybody plays snowshoe hare.
Mm-hmm.
So like, and then you go on like these forums and you're like, hey, that's like the most repetitious question, right? Like, what sound sequences do you use? You and I were talking about this one day.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the deal, right? If you're like, hey, Chris, and I know this isn't what you asked, but like, what sound sequence do you use? And I go, well, this is what you're going to do, James. You're going to do you're going to do snowshoe hare for 5 minutes. You're going to pause for 10. You're going to come back in with Eastern cottontail for 2 minutes, and you're going to pause for another 10 minutes. If this is what I'm doing every time I'm going out,
right,
and you're doing the same thing, and then Mo comes and asks you, hey, James, what did Chris tell you? Well, it doesn't even matter if I know what I'm talking about or not, right? We're all doing the same thing now. We're all kind of covering the same ground. What do you think we're doing?
We're
educating them.
Yeah. So like, it goes back to the spot selecting element. I wouldn't overthink it.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of stuff show up to things that make no sense. I've been so over it where I'm just not being successful, where I will like crank that thing and blow through the sounds, and and cats, you kind of get them on step like that too.
Yeah.
Because I kind of mentioned this before about like house cats. They're very distracted, right?
Yeah.
So you can overcall a canine. Like you can overcall a moose. They're smart.
Yep.
They know something's not right. Cats are a little easier to fool. Cats are going to be the most common thing that you call.
Yeah.
When you I feel like every time you talk to somebody and they're like, I finally called something in, or like fox, and that's pretty good. I don't really call a ton of fox.
Yeah.
I mean, unless I'm really hammering an area, like fox are pretty smart. And then I have buddies that's all they call.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm super jealous of that. Right. Like, but
yeah.
I mean, they're smart, but like I would kind of go by feel.
Yeah.
And I don't I've said this before. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way, but here's the thing. If we're all out there blowing snowshoe hare,
they're going to know what it sounds like.
I mean, like, come on.
Yeah.
I think this is what happens like locally when you get into like the tail end of moose season. Everybody's been out there like raking away. It's like, yep, it's the same. And so do something a little different. And I've watched like videos of lynx eating birds. Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of sounds might work? I mean, like,
right.
Well, and everyone thinks like, we're so geared towards everything eats snowshoe hares. No, they don't. Sometimes that availability is not there. And these things are not going to starve, right? So they resort to other food sources.
Yep.
It's like black bears. They don't need to eat meat.
Yeah.
You can be in a low moose density area and they'll just be like, cool, we're vegetarians now.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And they thrive. Right.
Yeah.
Or they're in a place where you got a high beaver, a high beaver population.
Yep.
And they'll just ambush beavers on the banks and they get their meat intake just like they're eating moose every day.
And sometimes they just find a barrel full of carbs and sweets, right?
Yep. Sometimes they hit the Krispy Kreme hard, and they,
Right.
Well, and so kind of along those same lines, I was going to ask your opinion on your opinion on another opinion. So there's, when you're scouring through and people you're doing your research into this and you're trying to figure out, okay, do I wail on the call, the whole 15 minutes, or do I give it a pause? Do I do this? What kind of calls do I use? You're kind of trying to figure out like what you should start with. There seems to be two common trains of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And one says use local animals only. Use the calls for the prey that is in the area, whether it's snowshoe hare, whether it's
fawn and
camp robbers, fawn. But the other guy, well, I have a fawn in distress.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to throw you off there at work.
But the other train of thought is to mix it up and use distress calls from animals that they might not be familiar with, because they're not necessarily keen into what kind of animal it's distressed. They just know it's a distress call.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so to throw off and use a totally random animal that might not even exist in your area, but it's a distress call, kind of like you'd said, if everybody's using snowshoe hare, they're going to know what the snowshoe hare distress call sounds like. Yeah. And they might even be able to distinguish a real one from a fake one at that point, because they've heard so many fake ones and so many real ones throughout the course of their life. If you start using any old distress call that you can try and just trying them out, the theory is that would throw them off to where they don't know if it's a real one or not. They just know it's a distress call.
Yep.
I kind of fall into that train of thought. I think that sounds realistic. What have you tried, like random, just like off the wall calls?
Yeah. And the thing is too, is like they're individuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like,
yeah.
I mean, and so that's another great, so this is another great thing. I don't just predator call.
Mm-hmm.
Like I will spot and stalk predators all winter long.
Yeah.
All right. And you can play with these ideas by keeping calls.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've seen stuff way off, and I'll start calling at it, and I mean, it won't even make sense.
Yeah.
And you get responses, right?
Yeah.
Like you get, and some animals key in on that, and they know that's not right. I mean, you can even see it. You'll see like where they just, I mean, they'll go the other way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right?
They're like, I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it's kind of back to the same thing. I don't think there's a right or wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think my way works. And I don't take everything to heart that I hear, right? Like
right.
Well, and you know what's cool is if you're not winning,
mm-hmm.
go through. I would definitely say though, it goes back to that whole thing earlier. Like you get some success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I do this a lot because my mind's in so many different places, work, home, right? Like
yeah,
all that stuff. And like I'll get on these little patterns. Like I'm blowing through the sounds, and then like, cool. I get up, I pause the caller or whatever, or whatever, and I go grab my critter, and I'm all pumped. And then I'll be at home that night, and I'm like I don't even remember what I was playing. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it's a good idea to kind of pay attention to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Slow down a little bit. And I have buddies too that they'll write down, because a lot of these displays now, they'll give you a moon phase display,
mm-hmm.
the temp.
Yep.
You get some of these things even offer like barometric pressure.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they get fancy.
Oh yeah. So you can and I got a buddy that he's pulling his phone out the whole time, like taking pictures of the remote, the Fox Pro remote. And like that's cool. He's one of those he's one of those data guys, right?
Yeah.
And and you know what? Like, and for him, that's part of the allure and the excitement, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't want to get into all that. I don't want to be pulling my phone out. My phone's in my hand all day long at work, right? Or up to my head.
Mm-hmm.
He's into he wants to go home and hey, what happened and that's cool. That's his deal.
Yep.
Right. Like some guys like to go
predator hunting journal and track
you
it
know,
and figure out.
And I mean, maybe that's not a bad idea. And
Yeah.
there's some dudes that when they set up bear baits and stuff, they like to go in there and spray, that's their whole deal. They just want to go spray a different scent every weekend. And that's they don't even realize they're just living for that.
Yeah.
Right? And whatever makes you pumped on what you're doing.
Exactly. No, well, and the funny thing is, and this is why it's hard to do predator hunting stuff. As far as informational, is because you can go to 10 different sites, or 10 different podcasts, or 10 different Facebook groups, and get 10 different answers on what people say works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's kind of why the point of us going into so much detail on this one is just there's some basics. Like you had said, with not slamming the doors, with not making a ton of sound, with controlling your scent, some things like that are good to pay attention to.
Make sure you have good functional gear too. And
going into, giving people options to try and then just go have fun. Like you said, it's not a high stress, once in a lifetime kind of hunt. Like it's not like you're going to blow out the bull of a lifetime. You're not making Boone and Crockett with any of these animals.
Yeah, you're not going after the big five here, right?
Yeah, you're allowed to just go have fun and enjoy it and just keep busy during the winter. If nothing else, at least you're out there doing something.
Well, and I think the idea too is if you're going to be here is not so much survive the winter, but look forward to the winter.
Yeah.
And get into this stuff.
Yeah.
And I used to dread winter and and I hear so many people how can I occupy my time? Just have fun with it.
Yeah.
And and the other thing, I there's times where I've had enough of winter. It starts warming up, and I'm like, man, I really miss calling, right? And then it's crazy too because you think about it, I gotta wait 6 months to do this all over again, and so it's just slow down and enjoy it, right? I mean, you look at bear baiting, the last day of bear baiting, you're like, I'm not going to do this for another year.
Yeah. It's
so crazy.
That's the hardest day.
It's so nuts. And predator culling's that way too. And there's sometimes where I'm ready to hang it up, right? I just got my butt kicked all winter long. Because that's I have seasons like that.
Yeah.
I have seasons where I just I have had years where my wife's are we just going to have fur for wallpaper or what? And then I'm yeah, you don't need to worry. I'm not on anything. I'm trying and I'm not.
Don't you worry, honey.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it goes back to
that's funny.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of jump offs from that. And we talk about fur and hide damage and stuff like that. But you will get to a point too where you want to keep everything. I was at that point where I wanted to keep all my fur, and you give it away and then you accumulate so much of it. And some of my trapping buddies and stuff, they're like, oh, you'll sell some of it. And then you start going through it and you start getting rid of it. You're I really want this new rifle or whatever. Right? You're well, I sell 5 of these. Right?
You gotta sell the fur to buy the new Predator rifle.
And you and then there's years you just don't. I mean, I've had years where I've gotten a few things and I'm stoked because it's been rough.
Yeah,
we're going. And the other thing too, that's probably a good thing to highlight right now. So we are in one of those. We had a really, really rough winter, right? And that really hurt our numbers.
Yeah.
And then we're in I think the first third of the low cycle, right? So getting into it right now, and that's not shouldn't be a deterrent.
Yeah.
But it should be something that's at the back of your mind that you're not gonna, and you might get into a pocket where you totally kill it, right? And do really well, but don't lose hope if you get into it and it's not panning out, right?
And a lot of it, you're like you said, you're doing it for the fun. You're doing it to stay busy. You're doing it for the passion of it. You're doing it because it's something to do. You're not going to be getting rich at the fur auctions from predator hunting, but it's a lot of fun, and I think it's something everybody can enjoy if that's what you're into. So.
There is something so different about having something run in on a predator call. It's just cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just such a cool feeling. And like that rush you get, like I've never lost that rush. Like every time, it doesn't matter. I have a fox run in, it's like a giant black bear running in, right? Like it's all the same to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like a little kid with it, like
Right.
I'm like to the point now too, like I've shot enough stuff that like I'm really excited to see other people shoot stuff. Now, right? Like, and I mean, there's still things I want to do. There's still like milestones I want to, like there's goals I want to hit, right?
Yeah.
But like still, I'm super excited about like when I take a friend out and I just see them like, they're just lit up over it, like killing a fox or a lynx, and they're, that's cool.
Well, hopefully you've helped out a lot of people get excited for this, get prepped up for it, and get ready to roll out there this winter. So, guys, we're going to wrap up this episode. Chris, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on this topic and diving in as deep as we dive into everything and just beating topics to death.
Heck yeah.
So
thanks for giving me an opportunity to like just sit here and like drone on about what I love to do.
Absolutely.
I'm stoked you guys are here.
So go ahead and plug your Instagram where people can go see all the fur that you lay down.
It's Apex, Alaska. And I kind of just got it going. I'm just throwing, a little random, and it's not all like predator hunting related stuff. It's just kind of like my little like highlights of whatever we go do. And
we talked about a lot of that stuff on Monday. And brought that out. So
so
awesome.
It'll get better. There'll be more stuff on there, and yep. And I'm cool with like I don't know it all, but if someone's like frustrated or they're trying to figure something out, I'm stoked on answering a question. Like hit me up, and I'm whatever we can do to try to
absolutely
succeed. I'm all about it.
Absolutely. Well, all right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging in there for this episode. If you have any questions about anything we talked about today, or you would like us to do a future Q&A episode about any of this, definitely hit us up at either of our socials, or you can reach out to Chris directly. But ours is at The Northern Hunter. If you search that on Facebook or Instagram, you'll find us. And again, we really appreciate any support you guys can give us for putting these kind of shows on. Easiest way to do that is like and share the show with your friends, and subscribe to it on whatever platform you're on. Throw us a rating. Obviously 5 stars is best, and a written review really helps us out a lot with the algorithms and sharing all this stuff. If you'd like to help us grow and produce more content, then if you head over to thenorthernhunter.com, we've got the shop page where you can get up some merch. That really helps us out. And then we've got a partners page with a bunch of great companies that make a bunch of great gear, all in the hunting realm, all stuff that'll help you be more successful in the field. And they've got discount codes they've given us. So if you go buy some gear from them, they will, you'll get a little bit of discount on that. It'll help the show out. And we really appreciate everybody listening and supporting what we're doing here. So thank you again, Chris. And until next week, get out there, get after it, and good luck. See you there.
All right, folks. We all know that one of the most common mishaps in hunting is damage to your rifle scope. Last year, I found the solution to that problem with the Stealthy Hunter rifle cover. It wraps around your scope and actions securely to protect it from getting knocked off of zero or even severely damaged. Stealthy Hunter also has a glassing pad and a wide variety of supplements for the outdoorsman, such as protein powder, CBD products, turmeric, and gut health supplements. They also make a lightweight trauma kit weighing in at just 14 ounces that includes everything you need and nothing you don't for all of your backcountry medical emergencies. To shop all of their equipment and supplements, go to STEALTHYHunter.com and enter the discount code at checkout, The Northern Hunter, to save on your order today. All Stealthy Hunter equipment is proudly made in the USA.